In a small town in the countryside, where time seemed to flow more slowly and traditions still held their place of honor, lived Regina, a 75-year-old woman whose blue eyes reflected a life full of experiences. Her gray hair, always arranged in an elegant bun, framed a face marked by time, but which still retained the sweetness of someone who had loved a lot. Regina lived in a modest but cozy house, with a small garden in front where she grew her beloved roses. Each flower was cared for with the same affection she had lavished on raising her only son, Roberto. The walls of the living room were full of photographs that told the story of a happy family, or so Regina believed. Roberto, now 45, was a successful businessman. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with his brown hair always neatly trimmed, he exuded an aura of confidence and power. His eyes, once as warm as his mother's, had become cold and calculating over the years. Married to Camilla, a woman 10 years his junior, Roberto seemed to have everything he had ever wanted: a prosperous career, a beautiful wife, and 2 adorable children. Camilla, on the other hand, was the kind of woman who attracted glances wherever she went. With long blonde hair, piercing green eyes, and a body sculpted by hours in the gym, she was the embodiment of glamour. Her smile, although dazzling, rarely reached her eyes, especially when directed at her mother-in-law. The day of Regina's birthday dawned sunny, as if heaven itself wanted to celebrate her 75th birthday. She woke up early, as usual, and prepared herself carefully for the lunch at Roberto's house. She put on her best dress, a light blue model that highlighted the color of her eyes, and pinned on her chest a pearl brooch she had received from her late husband. Her heart full of anticipation, Regina took a cab to the mansion where Roberto lived. With every kilometer she traveled, her anxiety grew. She hadn't seen her grandchildren for weeks and couldn't wait to hug them. When she arrived, she rang the doorbell, nervously adjusting her dress. The door opened, revealing Roberto. His normally composed face displayed a tense expression. "Mom," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "What are you doing here?" Regina felt as if she had been slapped. "Roberto, darling, it's my birthday. You invited me to lunch, remember?" Roberto's gaze hardened even more. "There's no lunch, Mom. I think you're getting senile." The words hit Regina like arrows. She took a step back, confused and hurt. But I'm sure Camilla called me." Just then, Camilla appeared behind Roberto, her face a mask of false concern. "Oh, Regina, what a mess. I think you must have misunderstood. We didn't plan anything for today." "Regina, Lucia," dit-il en s'asseyant lourdement dans le fauteuil. "Je crois que nous avons découvert quelque chose." Les 2 femmes se tournent vers lui avec impatience. "Mon contact à la police a finalement réussi à accéder à de vieux dossiers", commença Carlos, la voix sérieuse. "Apparemment, Camilla a un intéressant." Regina sentit son cœur s'emballer. Regina felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. How could they have forgotten her birthday? How could they treat her so coldly? Tears began to form in her eyes. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I just thought—" "You thought wrong," Roberto interrupted abruptly. His face contorted into an expression of disgust. "Mom, I think it's time we had a serious talk. You can't keep showing up like this unannounced. Camilla and I have our own lives, our own commitments. We can't be at your disposal all the time." Regina felt as if every word was a stab in the heart. "But Roberto, I'm your mother. I just wanted to spend my birthday with you, with my grandchildren." "The boys are busy with their tutoring," Camilla interjected, her voice too sweet to be sincere. "You know how important their education is, don't you, Regina?" Regina nodded mechanically, feeling increasingly lost. How had things come to this? When had her son, that sweet boy she had raised with so much love, turned into this cold, distant man? "Look, Mom," Roberto said, his voice now filled with impatience. "I think you'd better leave now. We have appointments and you're holding us up." Regina couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own son kicking her out on her birthday? She looked at Camilla, searching for some sign of compassion, but found only a cold, calculating smile. "Roberto, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to spend some time with you. It's my 75th birthday." It was then that Roberto lost his patience. His face contorted into a mask of anger and frustration. "Enough, Mom. Don't you understand? We don't want you here. Not today, not ever again." The words hit Regina like a punch in the stomach. She staggered backwards, unable to process the cruelty of her son's words. "Enjoy the streets, Mum," Roberto said coldly before slamming the door in Regina's face. Regina stood there on the sidewalk, feeling as if the whole world had collapsed on her. The tears she had tried to hold back now ran freely down her face. Her heart, already fragile with age, seemed to be breaking into 1,000 pieces. Not knowing where to go or what to do, Regina began walking aimlessly through the streets of the elegant neighborhood where her son lived. Every step was an effort, every breath hurt. How could her own son treat her like this? What had she done wrong? As she walked, lost in painful thoughts, Regina didn't notice a car approaching. It was only when she heard a familiar horn that she looked up to find the worried face of her friend Lucia. Lucia, a 70-year-old woman, was the opposite of Regina in many ways. While Regina was quiet and reserved, Lucia was outgoing and full of life. Her short hair, dyed a vibrant red, was a reflection of her energetic personality. "Regina, what are you doing here all alone?" Lucia asked, stopping the car next to her friend. When she saw the state Regina was in, her face filled with concern. My God, what happened? Regina tried to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply burst into tears, her shoulders shaking with uncontrollable sobs. Without hesitation, Lucia got out of the car and hugged her friend. "Come on, darling, let's go home. You need to calm down and tell me what happened." Lucia gently helped Regina into the car. All the way home, she held her friend's hand, offering silent comfort. Regina, for her part, seemed to have gone into a state of shock, her eyes fixed on a distant point, tears still streaming down her wrinkled face. Lucia's house was the opposite of Roberto's mansion. Small but cozy, it was filled with vibrant colors and eccentric objects that reflected the owner's personality. As soon as they entered, Lucia led Regina into the living room, seating her on the soft sofa covered in a multicolored crocheted blanket. "Now, my dear," Lucia said, sitting down next to her friend and holding her hands, "tell me what happened. Why were you walking alone in that neighborhood? And why are you crying on your birthday?" Regina took a deep breath, trying to control the sobs that were still shaking her body. With a broken voice, she began to recount what had happened at Roberto's house. With every word, Lucia's face contorted in a mixture of shock and indignation. "I can't believe it!" Lucia exclaimed when Regina finished her account. "How could Roberto do this? And on his birthday, that ungrateful brat." Regina shook her head sadly. "I don't understand, Lucia. Where did I go wrong? What did I do to deserve this treatment?" Lucia hugged her friend tightly. "You haven't done anything wrong, darling. It's your son who's acting like a monster. And that daughter-in-law of yours, I've always suspected her. There's something very wrong with this story." Just then, the front door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man entered the room. It was Carlos, Lucia's younger brother. At 65, Carlos still maintained the upright posture and sharp gaze of his days as a police detective. "What's going on here?" he asked, his deep voice full of concern at the state Regina was in. Lucia quickly explained the situation to her brother. As she listened, Carlos's face became more and more serious. "This isn't right," he said, sitting down in the armchair opposite the two women. "Regina, are you sure there was no misunderstanding?" Regina nodded sadly. "I'm sure, Carlos. Roberto made it very clear that he doesn't want me around. And Camilla," she seemed almost happy about the situation. Carlos frowned, his detective instincts awakening. "There's something very strange about this story. Regina, have you noticed any changes in Roberto's behavior recently? Or Camilla's?" Regina thought for a moment. "Well, now that you mention it, Roberto has been more distant in recent months. And Camilla, she's always seemed a bit cold towards me, but lately it's been even worse." Carlos exchanged a meaningful glance with Lucia. "Sister, I think we have a mystery to solve here." Lucia nodded, determined. "You're right, Carlos. Regina, darling, don't worry. We'll find out what's going on and make Roberto see the mistake he's made." Regina looked at the two of them, a small flame of hope igniting in her heart. "Would you do that for me?" "Of course," Lucia exclaimed. "We're your friends, Regina, and friends don't abandon each other." Carlos stood up, his expression serious. "I'll make some calls. I still have contacts in the police who can help us investigate Camilla's past. Something tells me she's the key to understanding this whole situation. Regina felt a wave of gratitude flood her heart. Even in the midst of the pain of her son's rejection, she found herself surrounded by the love and support of true friends. Perhaps, she thought, there was still hope. The next few hours passed in a blur for Regina. Lucia persuaded her to take a hot bath and put on some borrowed clothes, while Carlos made calls in his office. When Regina returned to the living room, feeling a little more composed, she found the dining table set with a simple but beautiful cake, decorated with candles. "Happy birthday, Regina," Lucia said, hugging her friend. "I know it's not what you planned, but we couldn't let the day go by unnoticed." Regina felt the tears return to her eyes, but this time they were tears of emotion. "Thank you, Lucia. You don't know how much this means to me." Carlos joined them, his face serious but with a touch of determination. "Regina, I've made some calls. An old police colleague of mine is going to help us investigate Camilla's past. He said her name sounded familiar, but he needs to check some old files." Regina nodded, a mixture of anxiety and curiosity taking hold of her. What could they find out about her daughter-in-law? As they shared the cake and a cup of tea, the three discussed the next steps. Carlos suggested that Regina stay with them for a few days, at least until they understood the situation better. Lucia agreed enthusiastically, happy to have her friend's company. Where are you watching this video from? If you like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Regina and Carlos looked at Lucia with confused expressions, but she just winked and continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for Regina. She alternated between moments of deep sadness, remembering Roberto's cruel words, and periods of hope, fueled by the unconditional support of Lucia and Carlos. Carlos spent most of his time on the phone or in front of the computer, going through records and talking to old contacts. Lucia, for her part, dedicated herself to distracting Regina, taking her for walks in the park or teaching her to crochet. It was on a sunny afternoon, about a week after the incident, that Carlos entered the room with a serious expression on his face. "What kind of history, Carlos?" Carlos took a deep breath before continuing. "Well, it seems that before she married Roberto, Camila was married to another businessman, a man called Eduardo Mendez. The marriage only lasted 2 years, but during that time, Eduardo's company suffered huge financial losses." Regina and Lucia exchanged worried glances. "And what does this have to do with Camila?" Lucia asked. Apparently, Carlos continued, there were suspicions that Camila was involved in embezzling money from the company. Nothing was proven at the time, and the case was quickly hushed up. Eduardo filed for divorce and the company managed to recover, but many questions remained unanswered. Regina felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think Camila could be doing the same thing with Roberto?" Carlos nodded slowly. "It's a possibility we can't rule out. Their behavior, their sudden hostility, it could all be explained if Camila was manipulating Roberto and trying to get him away from you, Regina." Regina felt a mixture of anger and worry. If this were true, her son could be in danger, but how to prove it, how to make Roberto see the truth? "What can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lucia, who had been silent until then, spoke with determination. "We need to confront them. Show Roberto what we've discovered about Camilla's past." Carlos shook his head. "It's not that simple, Lucia. We have no hard evidence, only suspicions. If we approach Roberto directly, he might pull away even more." Regina agreed sadly. "Roberto has always been stubborn. If we accuse him without proof, he'll side with Camilla." The three of them were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Regina who finally broke the silence. "What if—" she began hesitantly. "What if we investigated further? If we could find concrete proof that Camilla is doing something wrong?" Carlos looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "That would be dangerous, Regina. We'd be getting into something potentially illegal. But it's the only way to save my son," Regina replied, her voice gaining strength. "I can't stand by while Camilla possibly ruins Roberto's life and the lives of my grandchildren." Lucia smiled, putting her hand on her friend's shoulder. "I'm with you, Regina. If that's what you want to do, we'll help you." Carlos sighed, but a small smile appeared on his lips. "Well, it looks like we're going to need a plan." Over the next few days, the three of them worked tirelessly to find out more about Camilla's activities. Carlos used his contacts to obtain information about the finances of Roberto's company, while Lucia and Regina scoured social media and talked discreetly to neighbors and acquaintances. Little by little, a worrying picture began to emerge. There were discrepancies in the company's accounts that could not be easily explained. Employees had noticed strange behavior from Camilla when she visited the office. Even more alarmingly, they discovered that she was in frequent contact with a lawyer specializing in divorce and property division. "She's getting ready to leave him," Regina said, horrified, when Carlos shared this last piece of information. "She's going to ruin Roberto and then leave him." Regina's determination only grew with these discoveries. She knew she had to act, and fast, to save her son and her grandchildren. It was on a rainy afternoon that Regina decided to take the next step. With Carlos's help, she got the address of the law firm that Camilla was consulting. Determined to get more information, Regina prepared herself for an unexpected visit. "Are you sure about this, Regina?" Lucia asked worriedly as she helped her friend get ready. "It could be dangerous." Regina nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. "I have to do this, Lucia, for Roberto, for my grandchildren." Wearing a simple but elegant suit, Regina looked much younger and more confident than she felt inside. Her heart racing, she took a cab to the city center, where the law office was located. The building was imposing, all glass and steel. Regina took a deep breath before entering, mentally repeating the story she had prepared. She introduced herself at reception as a potential client, asking to speak to the lawyer Camilla used to see. To her surprise, she was greeted almost immediately. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with a practiced smile, greeted her warmly. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" he asked, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. "Silva," Regina added, using a false name. "Regina Silva. I'm considering divorcing my husband." The lawyer nodded understandingly, inviting her to sit down. "I understand, Mrs. Silva. These matters are always delicate. Can you tell me a little more about your situation?" Regina hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak, carefully mixing truths and lies. "Well, actually," she said, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a secret, "I'm more interested in knowing how to protect my investments. You see, over the years I've, let's say, embezzled some funds from my husband's company. Nothing too significant, of course, but..." The lawyer raised his eyebrows, clearly interested. "I see, Mrs. Silva. This kind of situation requires delicate handling." Regina nodded, feeling guilty for lying, but determined to continue. "Yes, exactly. And I've heard that you have experience with similar cases. A friend of mine, Camilla, recommended your services." On hearing Camilla's name, the lawyer seemed to become even more interested. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Camilla, a fascinating case, I must say." Regina's heart leapt. She was on the right track. "Really?" "She didn't give me many details, but she said you were helping her with a similar situation." The lawyer smiled, clearly proud of his work. "Well, I can't go into details, of course, but let's just say that Miss Camilla is well prepared for the future." Regina felt a mixture of triumph and horror. Her suspicions were being confirmed. Camilla was definitely planning something against Roberto. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Regina carefully extracting information without revealing her true intentions. By the time she left the office, her mind was spinning with everything she had discovered. Back at Lucia's house, Regina shared her findings with her friends. Carlos listened attentively, his face becoming increasingly serious. "Regina," he said when she had finished her account, "this is more serious than we thought. Camilla isn't just planning to leave Roberto, she's actively stealing from his company." Lucia gasped, shocked. "My God, what a terrible woman. How can we stop her?" Regina felt a wave of determination run through her body. "We have to tell Roberto. Show him all the evidence we've collected." Carlos nodded slowly. "I agree, but we have to be careful. Roberto might not believe us right away." The three of them spent the night working out a plan. They decided that Regina would go to Roberto's house the next day, accompanied by Carlos. They would take all the evidence they had collected, including the information about Camilla's past and the discrepancies in the company's accounts. The next morning, Regina dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she got ready. but her eyes shone with determination. "Are you ready?" Carlos asked gently when he arrived to pick her up. Regina nodded, taking a deep breath. "I am. We're going to save my son." The journey to Roberto's house seemed to take forever. When they finally arrived, Regina felt her heart race at the sight of the imposing mansion. The last time she had been there, she had been cruelly rejected. Now she was back to fight for her family. With firm steps, Regina rang the doorbell. Seconds later, the door opened, revealing a surprised and clearly uncomfortable Roberto. "Mom," he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and irritation. "What are you doing here, and who is that?" Regina took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. "Roberto, we need to talk. It's about Camilla, and it's important." Roberto frowned, but before he could answer, Camilla appeared behind him. Her face paled at the sight of Regina and Carlos. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Regina looked directly into her son's eyes. "Roberto, please let us in. There's something you need to know." For a moment, Regina feared that Roberto was going to lock them out again, but then, slowly, he opened the door wider. "Come in," he said, his voice tense. "But whatever it is, make it quick." Regina and Carlos entered the house, feeling the weight of the moment. The next words could change everything. Regina looked at her son, the man she had raised with so much love, and knew she was doing the right thing. It was time for the truth to come out. "Roberto," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "there's something you need to know about Camilla." Regina took a deep breath, gathering her courage for the words that would change everything. "Roberto, Camilla is not who you think she is. We've discovered things about her past and what she's doing now that you need to know." Roberto frowned, looking from Regina to Carlos and then to Camilla, who was visibly pale. "What are you talking about, Mom? Who is this man?" "This is Carlos, my friend Lucia's brother," Regina explained quickly. "He's a former detective and he helped us investigate Camilla." "Investigate?" Roberto exclaimed, his voice rising in pitch. "What right do you have to investigate my wife?" Camilla approached Roberto, putting a hand on his arm. "Darling, don't listen to them. Your mother has clearly gone mad." Regina felt a wave of frustration, but stood her ground. "Roberto, please listen to me. Camilla has a history of financial fraud. Before she married you, she was married to another businessman, Eduardo Mendez. During that marriage, his company suffered huge financial losses due to embezzlement." Roberto looked at Camilla, who quickly denied it. "That's absurd. Roberto, don't believe those lies." Carlos intervened, his voice calm and professional. "Mr. Roberto, we have documents that prove these allegations. What's more, we've discovered discrepancies in your own company's accounts that suggest something similar is happening now." Roberto seemed to hesitate, doubt beginning to creep into his eyes. "What kind of discrepancies?" Regina seized the opportunity. "Son, Camilla has been making suspicious transfers. She's diverting money from the company to personal accounts and..." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "She's been consulting a divorce lawyer." The room fell silent for a tense moment. Roberto looked at Camilla, who seemed to be panicking. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Camilla tried to keep her composure. "Of course not, love. Your mother is making all this up because she doesn't like me. Are you going to believe her instead of me, your wife?" Roberto seemed conflicted, looking from Camilla to Regina and Carlos. "Do you have proof of these accusations?" Carlos nodded, picking up a folder of documents he was carrying. "We do, Mr. Roberto. Here are the financial records, information about Camilla's past, and even recordings of her conversations with the divorce lawyer." As Roberto examined the documents, Camilla's face grew paler and paler. She started backing towards the door. That's all a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I can explain." But Roberto was no longer listening. His eyes roamed over the documents, his expression changing from shock to anger. You betrayed me," he muttered, looking at Camilla. "You stole from me. You planned to leave me." Camilla, realizing that her charade was falling apart, changed tactics. Her face contorted into a mask of anger. "So what? You think I married you for love? I deserve better than this mediocre life you were giving me." Roberto staggered as if he had been slapped. Regina took a step towards her son, wanting to comfort him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "Get out," he said to Camilla, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "Get out of my house now." Camilla looked around like a cornered animal. For a moment, it looked like she was going to argue further, but then her shoulders slumped in defeat. Without saying another word, she picked up her bag and left, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was heavy. Roberto sank onto the sofa, looking suddenly old and tired. Regina hesitantly approached, taking a seat next to him. "Roberto," she began softly, "I'm sorry. I know this must be a terrible shock." Roberto looked at her, his eyes full of pain and confusion. "Why, Mom? Why did you do all this?" Regina felt tears forming in her eyes. "Because I love you, son. Because I couldn't stand by and watch you being deceived and manipulated. I know I was intrusive, that I may have crossed a line, but I just wanted to protect you." Roberto was silent for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I was an idiot, wasn't I? I pushed you away, the person who cared most about me, because of her." Regina placed her hand on Roberto's. "You were in love, son. Love sometimes blinds us." Roberto looked at his mother, his eyes filling with tears. "Forgive me, Mom, for everything I said, for how I treated you." Regina felt her heart fill with love and relief. "Oh, Roberto," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Of course I forgive you. You're my son. I'll always love you and forgive you." They stayed like that for a long moment, mother and son reunited, beginning the healing process. Carlos, feeling that his role there was complete, discreetly said goodbye and left. In the days that followed, Roberto worked tirelessly to repair the damage Camilla had caused. With the help of lawyers and accountants, he managed to recover a large part of the embezzled money and save his company from ruin. Regina, for her part, temporarily moved in with her son to help with the grandchildren, who were confused and hurt by Camilla's sudden departure. With patience and love, she helped the family heal, re-establishing the bonds that had been damaged. Weeks passed, and little by little, life returned to normal. One sunny afternoon, Regina was in the garden of Roberto's house helping her grandchildren plant flowers when her son approached. "Mom," he said, sitting down next to her on the garden bench, "I've been thinking a lot over the last few weeks. About you, about our family, about everything that's happened." Regina looked at him, noticing how his eyes, once cold and distant, were now filled with warmth and affection. "And what did you conclude, son?" Roberto smiled, a genuine smile that Regina hadn't seen for years. "I've concluded that I'm incredibly lucky to have you as a mother. You risked everything to save me, even after the way I treated you. I can never thank you enough for that." Regina felt her heart fill with joy. "Oh, Roberto, you don't have to thank me. That's what mothers do. We love unconditionally." Roberto took Regina's hand and squeezed it gently. "I know, Mom, and I promise I'll never forget it. From now on, you'll always have a place in our home and in our lives. You are the heart of this family." Regina smiled through the tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you, son. This means more to me than you can imagine." They sat there, watching the children play in the garden, enjoying the sense of peace and family togetherness that they hadn't felt for so long. Regina looked up at the blue sky, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The road had been difficult and painful, but in the end, love and truth had prevailed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Regina reflected on everything that had happened: the cruel rejection, the risky investigation, the shocking revelation. Everything had led to this moment of redemption and reconciliation. She knew there were still challenges ahead. Roberto would have to deal with the legal and emotional consequences of Camilla's actions. The children would need time to adjust to their new reality, and they would all have to work to rebuild the trust and family ties that had been shaken. But looking at her son, seeing the love and regret in his eyes, Regina felt a deep certainty that they would be able to overcome any obstacle together as a family. "Grandma, look!" shouted one of the grandchildren, running towards her with a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. "I picked these for you." Regina smiled, taking the flowers and hugging her grandson. "They're beautiful, darling. Thank you." Roberto watched the scene with a fond smile. "I think it's time we went inside and prepared dinner," he said, getting up and holding out his hand to his mother. "What do you say we cook together tonight, like we did when I was a child?" Regina felt her heart fill with joy. "I'd love to, son." As they walked back to the house with the children running ahead, Regina felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. She had faced the most painful rejection of her life, but her strength and determination had not only saved her son from a terrible fate, but also restored and strengthened the family ties she held so dear. The journey had been long and difficult, but the end result, a family reunited, stronger and more united than ever, made it all worthwhile. Regina knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, with love, understanding, and the wisdom that only difficult experiences can bring. As she closed the door of the house behind her, Regina took one last look at the garden bathed in sunset light. She smiled, grateful for every moment of this journey that had brought her back to the heart of her family. The future, she knew, would be bright, full of love and new memories to be created. And so, with a heart full of hope and gratitude, Regina joined her family for another night of laughter, stories, and the kind of love that only a true family can provide. The circle was complete, the wounds were healing, and the future had never looked so promising.